I landed a job placement for my college program after my third year. I was in a forestry program and landed a position with a logging company that operated out of a small town in Washington state. I managed to find a basement apartment under a house in the main part of town. My landlord, Adam, was single and probably in his late 30s. He was a quiet guy, much like me. When I first moved in, he invited me to his place for dinner. He had his mom over too. It was kind of awkward, but they seemed like really good people, so I felt comfortable there. Being a co-op placement, it was more about the experience than the paycheck. It's what I told myself anyway, because the pay was very low. It was far away from friends and family, and I was barely making any money. So, it's good that the area was so beautiful. We were in the mountains, and I got to work outside almost every day. The nature of the job meant that I didn't get to meet many other people other than the few that I worked with. Being in my early 20s, it was rare that I would talk to anybody who was not at least 10 years older than me. The town was small, and opportunities to socialize were limited, so I spent a lot of time at home. This went on for the first month, and by then, I still hadn't made a single friend. My landlord must have noticed this, so one day when we were passing in front of the house, he invited me out. There wasn't much in the town, but it did have a few pubs. I hadn't been to any of them yet. When Saturday night came, Adam sent me a text after dinner, and we met out front to check out the bar. He told me that we were meeting some of his friends there. I felt like a bit of a charity case being brought out like that, but it beat another lonely night in the basement. The bar was a short walk, and we got there as the sun was still up. When we went inside, it had a wood-paneled interior and an old-style jukebox. The locals seemed to all know each other, and I felt like everyone was looking at me as we made our way to a table. Whether they actually were, I'm not sure. People are always paying attention to us less than we think. The place was busy, but not packed. We had no problem getting a table, but there were at least 20 or 25 people there. They were mostly older, but there was this one guy who couldn't have been much older than me, early 20s tops. He stood out, not because he was particularly interesting, but because he was clearly drunk and not handling it well. He was sitting at the bar, almost falling over, and it looked like he was all by himself. I looked over a few times when we first got in, and it seemed like nobody was with him. He was loud, slurring his words, and falling over. Everyone around him was clearly annoyed, trying to move away from him, but he seemed unaware that he was making a fool of himself. Adam caught me watching and leaned in to say, "Best not to get involved. Let him be." That was fair advice, but I couldn't understand why the bartender was still serving him. This went on for hours, and around 11 p.m., the bartender escorted the young man out of the bar. The drunk guy stumbled out the door, barely able to keep himself upright. We watched through the window as he disappeared down the street and then turned back to our drinks. I asked Adam if he thought the guy would be okay. He said, "I don't know," and shrugged. That was the last time we discussed it. The bar closed at midnight, so it wasn't long before we left as well. I was a little drunk by the end of the night, I imagine Adam was too. We walked back to the house and then went to bed. One day, the next week, when I was coming home from work, Adam was sitting on the porch smoking a cigarette. That was strange, because I had never seen him smoke before. When I was walking down to the side entrance, he called me over. I walked up to the porch, and he offered me a cigarette. I turned it down, but took a seat next to him. That's when he told me something I'll never forget. He had heard from someone in town that a body had been found in the river about a mile outside of town. It was the drunk guy from the bar. He had drowned, apparently fallen into the river while drunk. The news sent a chill down my spine. The mood in town shifted after that. Some said he was messing around and fell into the river, while others suggested foul play might have been involved. There was no evidence to suggest anything of the sort. The truth is that no one really knew what happened after he was kicked out of the bar. I think the most likely thing is that he was wasted and fell into the river. It doesn't need to be more complicated than that. I still can't understand why nobody made sure he got home safely. Usually, the bar is responsible for making sure drunk customers at least get into a cab. Since this was such a small town, though, everything was within walking distance, so maybe the rules were different. Still seems messed up to me, though. I still had another 2 months in that town, and for the rest of my time there, I kept my head down and focused on work. I never went out again because I was put off by how that young man was treated. I'm not aware of any consequences for the bar staff, but I think they should feel bad. I went to visit my parents about a year and a half ago. I live in a big city, but my parents moved to a small town about 10 years before this story took place. This is not where I grew up, though. They moved there after my sister and I went to college. The reason they moved was so that they could downsize to a place that was more appropriate for 2 rather than 4. They had a 2-bedroom condo in a gated community that was pretty nice. Even though there was a guest room at their place, I usually stayed at a hotel because I like to have my own space. I also brought my laptop and thought I might be able to get some work done after my parents went to bed. Their town was about 8 hours away, so it made more sense for me to drive than fly. I left in the morning, and it was late afternoon by the time I reached the hotel. The place where I normally stayed was full, so I had to stay at my second choice. It was more of a motel-style place with rooms on the ground floor and a parking lot in the middle. That being said, it was all right and looked clean. I parked in front of the office and then went in to get my key. I had made a reservation and paid in advance, so it was quick. There were a few cars in the parking lot, including a white van parked right in front of my room. It seemed out of place, but I went and parked next to it to be close to my room. As I unloaded my bags, I noticed a man in the driver's seat of the van. He was staring at his phone, not even glancing up as I passed by. I dismissed him as perhaps waiting for someone or taking a break. It could have been a work van, for all I knew. Inside, the room was exactly what I was expecting for the price, clean but dated, just a standard room. After taking a quick shower, I went to have dinner with my parents. Time passed quickly, and before I knew it, it was close to 11 p.m. That was past the time when my parents would normally go to bed, so I left and went back to the hotel. The parking lot was quieter than before, but the van was still there. As I passed it, I looked into the front window. It was empty, so I figured the guy just had the room next to me and had gone to bed. It seemed that there wasn't much more to it than that. I went in, took a shower, brushed my teeth, and laid on my bed. I opened my laptop, ready to watch something, but eventually, I closed it and put it on the bedside table. I closed my eyes and tried to get some sleep. That was when I heard a noise. It was like a creak in the walls, subtle, but enough to startle me. It could have been from one of the neighboring rooms, but I couldn't help feeling paranoid. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to check the room, if only to ease my mind and assure myself that it was nothing. I got up, turned on the light, walked around, looked under the bed, and then went to the bathroom to look around. I was feeling silly for even considering that there was someone there, especially because a lot of these hotels have thin walls. That sound seemed very close when I heard it, so I couldn't help but feel curious. Before going back to bed, I decided to check the closet. I hadn't even opened it since I'd been there. But when I slid the door open, I saw what looked like a dead body lying on the floor. I looked at it for a few seconds, thinking it was fake. It was lying face down, and I could see a messy head of hair with a hood from a blue sweatshirt covering part of it. I started breathing heavily, turned, and left through the door. I ran up to the front desk, out of breath and shaking. The night clerk, a young guy probably in his early 20s, looked up, startled by my sudden appearance. I managed to stammer out what had happened, and he immediately called the police. No more than 30 seconds later, I glanced outside toward my room. The van's headlights flickered on, and the engine started as it drove out of the parking lot. It seemed strange to me, as I still didn't know what was going on. When the police arrived and checked my room, the body was gone. When I heard that, I realized it must have been the man from the van. It couldn't have been anyone else. It turned out that the van belonged to one of the other rooms, but it was already gone. With only my word, there wasn't much the cops could do, and they left. He might have been a thief hiding until I slept so he could rob me, or worse, but nothing was missing, not even my laptop, which was right in plain sight. I didn't sleep that night, nor did I stay at that motel any longer. I went to my parents' house instead. When I told my mom what had happened, she could hardly believe it. The town was not known for crime, so I think the man was from outside their town, as neither of my parents had ever seen a van that matched that description. What his real intentions were, I don't know, but he scared the crap out of me for sure. I honestly thought I saw a dead body that night. I was living in Salt Lake City, Utah, when this happened. I was heading to Las Vegas to meet some of my friends from college, who were all flying in from different locations around the country. Even though it was just a 5 or 6 hour drive, I knew it would be lonely in the desert. And I was right. I had an old Honda Civic that had been with me for over 10 years. I had made this drive a few times before, so I thought it would be fine. When I was in the middle of the desert, my car broke down. I knew the engine was hot, and eventually, something blew. Steam poured from the front of my car, and I steered over to the side of the road while I still had the momentum to do so. I should mention that I was 30 years old when this happened, and it was 1998, so I didn't have a cell phone, not that there would probably be service there anyway. According to my map, there was a small town up ahead about 8 miles away, not unwalkable, but definitely farther than I wanted to go on foot. I decided to wait for a while, and if I needed to, I would walk for help. It was only 2 in the afternoon, so I had time. After about half an hour, a car pulled over. The vehicle was a beaten-up Ford with 2 people inside. I walked over and thanked them for stopping. The 2 introduced themselves as Jesse and Alan. They were 2 guys that looked to be in their 20s, and they let me get into the back seat. As soon as we started driving, it became clear that Jesse and Alan didn't like each other very much, or at least they were not getting along at the time. They were constantly arguing, which made for an awkward ride. I was trying to mind my own business and pretend I didn't notice, but how could I not? The first thing that either of them said to me was when Jesse offered to bring me to their house, which was in the nearest town, the one I was planning to walk to. I was surprised that these 2 lived together. I could only imagine how awkward dinner would be. Jesse then started talking about their other friend, Brutus. He talked about him like he was some kind of saint and insisted that I meet him. I told them politely that I wanted to get my car taken care of before dark, but they wouldn't let it go. Eventually, I agreed to check out their house, knowing that I could simply leave and find help in town. It was only a short drive to the town, and their house was just half a mile away from the service station, which seemed to have a tow truck service. We passed it on the way in. The house they brought me to was as unsettling as their company. It was a dilapidated old house standing alone in the desolate landscape. We got out of the car and went in. I followed the other 2, the whole time trying to think of a way to leave without being rude. As soon as I stepped inside, I saw a man standing in the front foyer. He was dressed in a suit, standing there as if he was waiting for us. Remember, none of us had phones, so they couldn't have told him I was coming. Jesse disappeared briefly, while Alan introduced me to the man in the suit. It was Brutus, though I'm not sure if that was his real name. Jesse then returned with a tray of drinks. They were just regular coffee cups, but he had them on what looked like a silver platter. The 3 of them each took one, but I noticed that none of them took a sip. Maybe they were waiting for me, or maybe there was something in those cups that they didn't want to drink. I tried to refuse mine politely, but I could tell they weren't having it. I was still standing near the front door, and nobody was blocking it. I guess they thought I had nowhere else to go. But I took my opportunity right then and ran outside. I looked back every few seconds as I ran toward the town. The service station was visible in the distance, and I knew I could make it. Eventually, I saw a car coming up from behind. I was among some other houses, but still alone on the street. I managed to hide behind a tree before the vehicle caught up with me. From there, I watched the car prowl the streets, looking for me. Eventually, they gave up, and I made my break for the service station. There was a single guy working there, and luckily, he seemed normal. The worker told me that the tow truck driver was on call that day and it would be 2 hours before he could help. As I was waiting in the station, Jesse walked in. He walked straight toward me, looking angry. I thought he was going to try something, but there was the worker in the station, and there were also a few customers there, so he didn't make a move. After he left, the gas station worker's laugh broke the tension. "Those guys are crazy," he said. "You didn't go into their house, did you?" he asked me while laughing. I looked over at him and forced a smile. "I got out of there fast," I told him. He laughed again and then went back to his work. The tow truck driver arrived, and I left the town behind. The driver was able to fix my car on the spot, and I made it to Vegas before dark. My friends thought the story was hilarious when I told them later. Maybe those guys were just a bunch of harmless weirdos, or maybe they were actually dangerous.